a little bit about how you got involved with Ringling and kind of what you did with them?
Yeah, I had graduated the year before from Cornell University. I had a degree in animal science and biology, but I was really interested in zoos. So I really came at it from the animal nutrition side. I find exotic animal nutrition fascinating because every species is so different in what it needs, and figuring out what that is and how to meet it in a zoo setting was really fascinating to me. So I was looking at zoo jobs, and there was a posting for an animal handler posted by Feld Entertainment, which is the company that owns Ringling. They also own Monster Trucks and Disney on Ice and all sorts of things. So it's a big corporate thing at this point. And I saw an animal handler, and I'm like, run away and join the circus? Sure. What else would you do with a science degree from an Ivy League university? Sounds great. So I applied, and they hired me, which was super cool. And I flew out to Indianapolis, and the people on the show itself weren't completely expecting me, which, should have been my first sign of what it would be like to work at Ringling. So I show up with my suitcases, and they're like, oh yeah, maybe we did hear about a new hire somewhere in there. Cool. All right, we'll find you a spot. Don't worry. So yeah, I got that was fall of 2006, and I stayed through the end of 2007. I was hired on as horse crew. So what that meant was I was basically the way it worked. Any given crew member was kind of given responsibility in the horse barn. You were kind of given responsibility for particular animals, and they were kind of your animals. And, you were in charge of making sure they were always fed, they were watered, their stalls were clean, they were always ready for show. Any rehearsals or practices they were involved in, you were there. We really didn't get days off. We worked pretty much every day. I think in the year and a half I was there, when I actually did the numbers after the fact, I think I averaged 1 day off a month. And you kind of got that by, at the very last minute, it might be the night before, where the boss would walk by and be like, yeah, take tomorrow off. Yeah, there's a dark day, take tomorrow off. So it's not like you could plan anything, and you're in a random city and you don't have a car, and you're somewhere between the train tracks of whatever cheapest train yard they could park the train in where we lived, and the arena, which is often not in the most interesting part of town either, because it's as far away from all the stuff as anything. So time off was not really a thing. You worked every day because you were the only people there. There wasn't a whole crew of rotating people with weekends like you would in a normal zoo kind of setting. You traveled with the show. You lived on the train. You were there all the time, and every day was work because the animals need to be fed and watered and cleaned every day. But so it was actually interesting. I came on apparently 2 days after these new 4 paint horses had arrived. They were going to be for the new show that was coming up. And they had no training, and they didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what was going on, and they were still in quarantine. So they had to be separated out from the other horses because they'd just arrived. And so they basically threw them at me, and they're like, oh yeah, I hear you have some horse experience, which is like, I rode some horses when I was a teenager. Oh, you have some horse experience. That's great. Here's a shovel. Here's a bucket. Here are your 4 horses. Try not to get kicked. Like, great. And that was kind of the extent of my training. So it was a little bit of a rough start, and neither me nor the horses knew what was going on, but we figured it out together. We kind of learned the ropes together, and it was fine. And we ended up getting along. I was drawing on everything I knew about animal behavior from the start. I'm like, okay, I know all this in theory, get to apply it really fast here. So,
that's cool that they kind of had you with specific sets of animals, though, because I always kind of thought it'd be more generalized, but then you can really know them and know when they're off in any way or anything's different, or if you get to kind of work with the same ones all the time. It's probably good.
Absolutely. It was very much, horse barn was very much, it made it easy to divide up the work, I think was really the thing, but it also was really good because you knew your animals like inside and out, because you spent all day, every day with them in every condition. And you knew the moment, like, you walk in the stall and they don't respond the way they normally do. And you're like, oh boy, what's up today? Let's got to figure this out. So, yeah, that was a very cool part of it, actually.
What did the paint horses, what was their show activities that they did?
Yeah, so I was, most of the horses in the unit I was in were part of Liberty Act. I know, I can't remember in Water for Elephants. It's been a long time since I read it while I was on the Circus Train, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
because it came out right around the same
Act,
time. That's funny.
It did. And I was a Cornell alum, so I had so many people tell it, it's like, Laura, this could be your life. You need to read it. I'm like, oh, and I don't remember if they talk about a Liberty Act in there, but the idea that there's basically a trainer in the center of the ring, and you have some number of horses that are just running around in the ring, and they're at liberty, so they're just running around, and there's the trainer in the middle giving the cues and commands. So the horses can and often do whatever they want in the ring. And I mean that you train up a routine. So usually there's sort of a standard Liberty routine, which is, all the horses running in a line around the circle, and then they'll call them to the center and they'll change direction. They'll go the other way. You have a pas deux, which is where the back half of the line comes up next to the other. So now you've got double horses going around, in the circle. And they can do a valse, which is each individual horse kind of pivots in their spot. And sometimes you can do that with 2 or 3 in a row. So they'll have 2 horses doing this kind of, do-si-do around each other, essentially. Pas six, where you can get everybody and basically have what looks like the arm of a clock kind of going around from the center point of all the horses together. So there's all sorts of different sort of standard Liberty Act moves, and there's no connection between there's no physical connection between the trainer and the horses. There's nothing holding the horses in. There's just the ring curb, but the ring curb's only this high. So if something spooks the horses or if they don't want to be there, they just hop out of the ring, which is always very entertaining for the audience and a lot less entertaining for those of us who have to go quickly round up the horses.
Yeah, I was going to say, is that your job to go catch them?
Yep, that was one of our jobs if things went bad. Floor crew would also sometimes jump in. We had one horse in particular, Miko, who occasionally liked to go say hi to the audience. He would just hop out of the ring and go trot himself around and have a grand old time until somebody caught him and kind of threw him back in the ring. He's like, oh, okay, oh, this is what I'm doing again. Oh yeah, he's a bit of a space shot.
That's great.
Sweetie. They all had really different personalities. It was fun. So yeah, I don't know what sort of things you folks had as questions, or if there was anything you were particularly interested. I mean, obviously I can babble on about this stuff, so, but if there's particular things that came up from reading the book or in general, I'm happy.
Well, that was really cool because I think there's at least one scene where they're doing the Liberty Horse Act in the book that we just read, so it's neat to see all the terms. So are there other circus terminology that normal people don't use that are interesting? Other words?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's got its whole own I think they bring up in the book. There's all sorts of terms that they use. So I know they use the term kinker for circus people. I've never heard that term used in modern circus. I don't. That's not. I've heard circus folk.
20s.
Yeah, circus folk tends to be. So the distinction between circus folk and carnies is very, very solid. Because a lot of people, especially the people working in concessions and some of the sort of crew positions, had been carnies at one point, but moved with carnivals, which is more you go to the mall parking lot, or and they've set up all the mechanical rides, and there's the sort of fairway and that sort of carnival thing. And a lot of them started there, and working for a company like Ringling is a huge step up. So they were very, very adamant about getting it clear that they were not carnies anymore. No, that was in the past. They'd moved up from there. So that was definitely a distinction. Yeah, I mean, there was. I also do folk singing, and there's an old Whalerman's alphabet that I co-opted to use a bunch of circus terms. I'm trying to run through the alphabet in my head of various things that I had. There's terms like cherry pie. There were lots of ways to earn a little bit of extra money on the side, animal crew going and pulling cables when it was time to load out. Like after you got the animals secured and your job was done, the floor crew would still be like pulling cables because there were just miles of cable to work all the lights. So you could go pull cables for loading out the show and you'd get extra money for doing that. One of my friends on the horse crew fixed shoes for the dancers. Like they'd give them the whole box of worn out shoes and he'd put new soles on them. And that was, they'd get paid extra, and that was called cherry pie. So that was an extra bit of doing things. Or I don't know. Yeah. I mean, all the moves in any performance has its own terminology, and you kind of throw them around like all those different moves in the Liberty Act, often slightly corrupted versions of French or German or something that, you know, I mean, it's a very multicultural kind of world, because I mean, we had people, I mean, even just on the horse crew, we had, you know, there was a bunch of Americans, but our bosses were from Bulgaria and from Germany. There were a couple, the wife was from Bulgaria, the husband was from Germany. We had someone from Vietnam. We had two guys from Poland. We had, we had people from we had a few people from Mexico. And that was just in the one horse crew. So, I mean, you expanded out to like the 200 people who were there. And I mean, there were people from all over the world with varying levels of shared language and just from complete varied backgrounds, from people with masters in theater to people, homeless person, people who just wanted a job and went, sure, I'll get on a circus train and work crew. So, I mean, it was, you know, a full spectrum of people, and you all had to make it work somehow, because you lived together, you worked together, you partied together. If you had a personal falling out with someone, you still had to see them all day, every day, and get along, which was a little bit challenging at times. But it also meant that you had this really crazy polyglot world of and I mean, lots of weird terminology would just kind of pop up just because someone would try to say something in English and it would get moved over here, and then someone wouldn't even recognize that that's where that was coming from, and it would just become the word we'd use for things. I still don't honestly know if the word cashier means anything outside of because somebody referred to it as like the stuff that like there were harnesses that we'd put on the Liberty horses that would kind of rest across their shoulders and go back behind the legs, and it would hold the bridle rein. And someone referred to those as cashiers at one point. So I started using that term, and I've never heard anyone else use it. And at one point, one of the bosses just said, "Stop saying that." So I have no idea what the actual word was or where it came from. I don't know. For all I know, it was a bad word that someone told me as a joke just because they thought it was funny that I kept saying it. Like, I mean, that's the kind of thing that would happen all the time. So
That's hilarious. Barbara, do you have any questions you want to ask?
Well, you answered a couple of them, but then again, about how many people total were employed on, your route or this group?
Yeah, I think we were somewhere, it sort of varied, but I think we were somewhere around 200 people if you included, probably on a little over 200 people if you included performers and crew and clowns and support. Because we had our whole own train crew and all the porters that kept the train clean. We had a school teacher for all the kids of the families who were there. We had people who were working the daycare. We had wardrobe. And then we had all the admin. I mean, we had like our finance person and our things like that. I mean, the concessionaire. So somewhere between 200 and 250, I think, is usually the number I'd hear thrown around. And on our animal crew, we had probably around a dozen people in the horse crew, and then like another 10 12 people for the elephants, and then the tiger trainer Taba at the time, he had his guys there, so they had a dedicated crew of guys he'd been working with for a long time. They kind of came with him and the tigers. So that was another crew of like 3 or 4 people. So we had a lot of people just working. We didn't have that many. We had more people than animals. That's how much attention they got.
So you started, and so from what I gathered, when you started, and then you kind of wintered over in Tampa, and then went on the road.
Yeah, yeah.
And so how long was that? When did you start, or how long was your season?
The season ran so winter quarters would be kind of this late December through early January. So somewhere mid-January, we'd get on the road and sort of do a soft open touring other Florida cities. And then we'd stay on the road and bounce around. We went all the way out to California and came back kind of by way of the northern states, and ended up again back to like early December is when we ended up back in Florida. And then we were in the non-new show. We were just in the sort of refurb winter quarters, which is in Orlando for that time. So I mean, it was still a year-round job, but you were on tour pretty much from mid-January through early December. You got about 4 weeks, in 4 to 6 weeks, depending, in the Florida winter quarters.
Then what did you like best about the job?
I mean, I loved getting to travel around. I kind of liked the intensity of it, because you don't have days off, and you really were immersed in this world, and you could kind of forget that there was anything outside of it. I sort of liked that. I liked meeting just people I never would have otherwise, and several of them I'm still friends with. I still talk with my friend who's in Poland on a semi-regular basis. I've got several friends who went on to work in zoos and other positions, so it's been cooler working with horses. And I really enjoyed getting to meet so many people from so many backgrounds. It was a good wake-up call for me. I'm kind of glad that was an early experience after college, because I've been a very bubbled person my whole life, and it really forced me to understand, to just learn a lot more backgrounds and the kinds of backgrounds people are coming from, and learning how to get along with a lot of different people and such things. So that's really the thing I like the most about it. You meet the most amazing people.
So why did you leave that? You said you worked for a year and a half. Did you get, what was your next job, or what prompted you to leave?
Part of it was really exhausting. It was really stressful, but working every day. You don't get time off, so you can't see friends. You miss your friends' weddings. You don't go home for holidays. You kind of, there was something kind of cool about that intensity, but it's also very isolating. And there was a lot of drama. This was not a low stress job. Everyone is very intense. It was very stressful. And I finally got an offer, as I'd been applying for zoo jobs all along, because that was what I had wanted to do. And I did finally get an offer for a full-time keeper job in Boston at the Franklin Park Zoo. So the sort of combination of, I think it's time to do something else. And that seemed to be moving me more towards the more scientific animal husbandry that I was originally looking for before I got pulled into this crazy adventure. So that worked out, especially since I was from New Hampshire. So it was going to put me back towards home. And I'm like, all right, this is going to be a good way to like reset my brain and get back on a track.
Mm-hmm. So for all the feed and water and all of that stuff for the animals, how did they transport it? Did you get deliveries of fresh stuff? Or I'm kind of just curious about how all that works.
Yeah, being just kind of crew, I didn't have to worry about a lot of that. We had our operations manager and sort of the lead of animal care, and then the operations manager were the people who handled all those logistics. But yeah, they'd arrange to have, we'd have an overland crew that would like drive ahead of the train. And sometimes I was on that, and sometimes I rode on the train with the animals. But we'd have an overland crew that would go ahead of the train and get to the town where we were headed to, like the day before, or at least several hours before, but usually the day before, and they'd have a bunch of trucks with all the stalls and such, and they'd get those set up, and they'd also arrange to have a shipment of bedding arrive. So we'd get big pallets of wood shavings that would arrive so you could put down the bedding. They'd make sure there was hay delivered. So we'd have hay on site when we'd get there. So that would arrive in a big truck, and we'd have to transport it off of the pallets that arrived in and put it in the semi truck that would keep it dry. So yeah, all of that stuff came in from the outside. I know the elephants, I mean, the horses were pretty straightforward because it was make sure there's bedding, make sure there's hay. They didn't have a lot of elaborate stuff. The elephants, I know, were a lot more complicated. They'd have arrangements with food distribution because they got fresh bread in every town. They had to have like mounds and mounds of produce for them in addition to the hay. They would arrange to have sand piles delivered so that they could lay down, especially if we were in outdoor spaces in parking lots. So they'd have some soft bedding. So they'd sometimes get like these massive mounds of sand delivered for them. But yeah, the logistics guys were all over that, and we'd get this stuff delivered. We didn't have a lot of space to transport stuff from one another. We did have one semi truck that would kind of have like the backup so that like if we arrived in the next town and things hadn't arrived yet, we'd usually have like a day's worth. We'd have one filling of bedding, and we'd have, you know, a day or two's worth of hay transported with us just in case. But for the most part, yeah, it was delivered fresh into each town. And water, I mean, we'd hook up to whatever municipal water system there was in any place. There's always hookups. There's always things around there. I did laugh. I know in the book the whole thing of, oh, I know you're not real because nobody carried water for elephants. I find funny because during water stops on the train, you'd pull out the big buckets and you'd fill them with water for the elephants, and you'd carry it up and hold it. So I was always amused by that being a thing. But mostly, I mean, traveling these days, there's municipal water hookups at every arena, so they can just hook up a big fire hose and other hoses we need. And
that's funny. I did wonder when we read that in the book. I was like, well, how else did you get? What else would you do? Hey, Julie, if you have any questions, feel free to ask as well.
Thank you. I'm good. This is great news. As a child, my father made a cage that we carried pet bulldogs and puppies in a parade, and we called ourselves Ringling Brothers, Varnum and Dayvault. And we won first prize in the parade.
Oh, that's delightful.
So I've always had a warm spot for Ringling Brothers. We used to love when it came to town. It was so exciting.
I thought of another question. What were living quarters like? Because I know you're packed in with the same people and living and working with them. So just kind of what was your living situation? What were meals like? That sort of thing.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to come in, several years after the union. The workers had already unionized and actually got us some considering the situation, it was pretty cushy living. So on each train car, I mean, when you first start, there were different sizes of rooms, but most crew would be starting in the smallest size, which is a standard Amtrak car that's been converted into 14 rooms. So if you can imagine subdividing an Amtrak 14 times, that's how tiny our rooms were. They were about 4. Someone told me they were 4 by 6. I think 5 by 8 is a little more accurate because I know the tall guys could actually lay down in their beds, so it must have been longer than 6 feet. So I think we were more like in the 5 by 8. And you had an individual room with a lock, which is always important. But each room had its own microwave and mini fridge and a sink, which you may or may not trust the water that comes out of it. It's whatever we hooked up to in the train yard. And they were just like, if you've ever been on board like small ships or small boats where they can just like turn everything into a cabinet, and it's amazing how much storage you can fit into there. So, I mean, every space in there was cabinetry. Your bed was one of those sort of conversion things where it's like, yes, it could be a flat thing where it would be your bed, or you could like lift up the center portion and now you'd have 2 seats and a table in there. You probably didn't have enough room to do that because what are you going to do with the mattress? It's a nice spot. But there was just storage everywhere. So it was this tiny little room, and that was your own little room. And then there was the corridor that connected you all. And each living car had its own washer and dryer. And you had a shared bathroom with a shower in the middle. I was on a car that had 2 bathrooms. I was on one of the few designated co-ed cars. So it was men and women. There weren't enough women on the crew to have their own car. So there was one that was designated for the women. So there was there was a second bathroom with its own key, and only the women had the key to the second bathroom. But it was tight. We didn't have water when the train was moving because all the water would be in the tanks, and we weren't allowed to do showers or laundry during that because there was very limited water. So you could get enough out of your tap, but you didn't want to use up large amounts. Yeah, that was kind of the thing. So they were tiny little rooms, and the vestibules between the cars were kind of like our front porches. Like that's how you'd hang out in the evening. Like Jimmy, one of the elephant guys, would come by and just be like, "Oh, get your glass. Go bring your glass." And you'd bring your wine glass out there, and he'd have something out there, and he'd be pouring for everybody. Or people would come up with their beers or whatever else they had, and we just hang out on the vestibule like it's the front porch. So it was kind of cool. It was a neat setup. And we'd be parked by the train cars. We parked in a different train yard each week, and sometimes there was stuff you could walk to from there, which was cool. Most of the time, there wasn't. Sometimes you were penned in by active tracks, which you really, really don't want to take any chances crossing. Trains are surprisingly quiet and move very quickly. So if you've been warned about active tracks, you don't cut across them. Yeah. Oh, and you have to secure everything, which I didn't fully understand during my first train run, because trains, if you've ever ridden on a train, which you probably have, they move a lot, they sway a lot, they rock a lot. So all of your stuff, if you don't secure it down, will go flying out of it. And in the cabinet, I mean, again, like boat kind of style with cabinets with magnet closed and things would be good. But I learned very quickly that pushing all of my books to the way back of the shelf was insufficient to keep them in place. So I had a nice rainstorm of books upon my head in the middle of the night on my first train run as we hit a particularly rocky place. So buying bungee cords was one of my top priorities in the next town to lash everything down. Yeah.
I'm like, this is my chance to ask anything for one. So much pressure to one.
Well, it's nice to know somebody who was in the circus. Who actually ran away and joined the circus.
I did. And then I ran away from that and joined the real world again, to some degree.
So I know Ringling Brothers kind of shut down like a few years ago. Do you think they'll ever be back? I don't know if you or circuses in general. I don't know.
I mean, circuses in general did not disappear with Ringling. There are still several small circuses. I don't know what their status is following COVID, because I mean, any kind of operation like that is running right on the edge of, financial sustainability and as a general rule. So I don't know what this year did to the smaller circuses. I'm not as tapped into that as I once was, as people I know have kind of left the field. And I don't have any connections left at Ringling, so I don't know what's going on there. Though it was kind of noted that they had a posting on the Feld Entertainment site for a casting director for Ringling Brothers Circus. So I don't know what they've got in the works. I would be very surprised if they did any animal things. I would assume it would be a non-animal circus if they did it. It might not even be a traveling show. They might just have like a permanent, there's a lot of shows that'll just have like a permanent arena where this is where you come to see the circus. So I mean, this is pure speculation. I have no idea. But apparently they are doing some stirrings. They did not sell the name Ringling Brothers, and it sounds like they might be poking around at something there. But yeah, it was very sad to me when everything shut down, just because, like I was saying earlier, just that idea of, you get so many people from so many parts around the world and so many different backgrounds, so many education levels and so many different experiences and languages. And there's just not that many environments where that genuine cross-cut of humanity lives together and works together and has to get along and really, really that sort of flow. And I feel like there's less and less of that sort of thing. And I'm really sad that that sort of world disappeared, because I don't think they sold off the train when the show shut down, and I don't think they're going to buy another one, because that took a lot of maintenance and effort. So the idea of people traveling around and living together on a train, I think, is over, which is kind of sad, because it was a unique sort of thing.
In hiring, did you have to apply and fill in applications, that kind of thing?
Yep, it was just like applying to any other job. It was a job posting I found online, filled out an application, did a phone interview, where mostly they tried to convince me not to take the job.
They want you to be really prepared for the tough lifestyle.
Yes, they did not sugarcoat anything during my interview. They're like, this is not a job, it's a lifestyle. You're committing to something really wild. So
what were the hours like? Did you like get up early and work really late every day, or?
Yeah, we were pretty much on call 24/7. So on a standard day, once we were already settled in a town, you'd usually have an 8 a.m. call, and we had a bus that would take us from the arena where the train was parked over to from the train yard where the train was parked over to the arena where the show was happening and where everything was sort of staged. And that was usually 8 a.m., but it depended. Sometimes, like when we played Atlantic City, the train was parked like an hour and a half or 2 hours away from the arena. So you had to get up at, 6:30, 6 a.m. to get on the bus to go to work, because you needed to get there, because we'd do a practice run through the acts for an hour or two every single morning. So you had to be there for that. And then you'd kind of hang around and make sure everything was done, do chores and such around the barn until the show that night. Or on a 3-show day, you get there and you just hit the ground running and have to have your animals ready. For my horses were in the pre-show, which meant that I had to get up and have them groomed and ready and dressed for, whenever that would have been for, 7:30 or 8 when the pre-show would open. So it would usually be there. And then the show didn't end until like 9:30 at night, and then you had to kind of wrap everything up. You wouldn't get back to the train until 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night, and then you get up and do it again the next day. If we were doing a loadout or we're during a train run, you could be working any time in there. We'd have to have clearances to get the animals walked back. So sometimes the animal walks would happen at 3 a.m. or, at middle of the day, or sometimes the animal walks were half a mile and sometimes they were 6 miles, and you just had to be ready during the train run for water stops. When we'd get out and we'd feed and water the animals in the train cars, those were completely dependent on the train schedule, so they would happen at least every 8 hours. But they were kind of maneuvering around when can we be in a safe place, because they have to get the train in a position where they could stop it and it would be safe for a whole bunch of us to walk the half mile down the train on the outside to get to where the animals were, so we could turn on the water and put in fresh hay and all of that sort of thing. And that could happen anytime, day or night. So the rest of the crew was kind of off. That was their time off, was during the train runs, and they could drink and they could do all that stuff, but it's like you kind of couldn't, because you never knew when someone's going to come and knock on your door and be like, oh, you got to go. Water stop time. It's like, oh boy, okay.
I'm always interested in the food. Did people with the community cook, or did people with your crew cook? Did you all have meals?
We were long after the days of, you can find some really great pictures of the old Ringling dining tent where they'd have like whole group dinners and everything, which are great. We were long after those days. We did not have like a big dining tent. We had on the train, there was the pie car, which was basically kind of the equivalent of a mini Greasy Spoon diner in a way. Like it was one car, and they had their little grill and sort of cook area, and you could get burgers and sandwiches and sort of breakfast sorts of foods from them. And there were a bunch of booths set up along there, so you could kind of hang out. And that was kind of during train runs. You'd spend a lot of time hanging out in the pie car because it was open 24/7. So you can go and get your craving for but I guess you couldn't get French fries. They couldn't run the fryer during a train run because, as previously noted, wild rocking trains not so good with pots of hot oil. But you could get yourself a burger or a sandwich and chill in the pie car with people if you wanted to get out of your little, 5x8 room after several hours, which you probably did. You could go hang out there, and they had movie screens and such, little TV screens to watch movies. People would do that. But yeah, that was sort of the on. And then at the arena, there was the Pie Car Junior, which was basically a little food truck that would go out, and same sort of thing, sandwiches, burgers, sort of things that you could buy, and that was relatively inexpensive. But a lot of people did cook, especially the European folks tended to not buy into this whole they because a lot of them, like my friend from Poland, had his little hot plate that he'd have set up in his room, and I know a lot of people had rice cookers and various things, so they would just make their own food. And I just said we had a microwave, and you could set up like a little hot plate and such things. So people would cook in their rooms. A few people had grills, so that when we were parked somewhere, people would pull out the barbecues and grills and set them up in the train yard, and there'd occasionally be gatherings there. So yeah, there were lots of. You'd scope out in the first few days where the good restaurants you could walk to from the arena and the train were, and everyone would share that information. It would kind of percolate through the crew, so you knew where to go get the good food in the town.
So you'd have to go grocery shopping maybe. Yeah,
they would do a weekly bus to Walmart. They'd wherever the local Walmart was, we'd get in the morning. Animal crew would struggle with that because usually it was during, downtime, which was when the animal crew was running their animal practices. So it was a little more complicated for us to get to the grocery store. But yeah, they would do a run to a Walmart because that was the easiest thing to find, and it was inexpensive. So people liked that, and it let people buy other things in one trip that they might otherwise need, because it was really hard to get places because none of us had cars. So you kind of had to catch as catch can for when you could get places if you needed something.
I'm so sorry that you no longer had the food tents. That just seems so wonderful.
I know. Our schedules were so weird and staggered. I just try to imagine what a different feel it would have been if the entire show just sat down and had dinner at the same time every night. It's a completely different way of running things from how when we were. But I was in the cushy modern Ringling of arenas and such. We didn't have to set up a giant circus tent. We didn't have hundreds of animals on the show. We had a few dozen, and we arrive and the building's there, and we just need to rig it up, and we just had to put up a little tent for the animals out back if they didn't have room on the inside and that sort of thing. So we had a pretty cushy. As circus goes, it was about as luxurious as you could get. Private rooms, food available.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Yeah. It was a good way to get to do it.
It's interesting to hear about tutors and daycare and that sort of thing too, because I guess families kind of grow up there too, not just single people on the road. But.
Oh yeah, absolutely. A lot of people, crew and performers had their families there, and no one was allowed to just be a passenger on the train. So if you were crew and you got hired and you wanted to bring your spouse, the spouse also need to have a job. So a lot of the time, the people who are running the daycare or a lot of wardrobe and daycare and sort of those side things were often the wives of people who were working floor crew or in the pie car or backstage or one of those sorts of things, or the techs. One of the people I worked with on Animal Crew, her husband was one of the sound techs for the show. So there was a lot of that sort of thing. But yeah, a lot of people had kids. There were a lot of kids running around. A few that were born while I was there. They grow up in that kind of world, and it's sort of wild. And there was a school teacher, and it was sort of like old school schoolhouse. Everyone, the whole range of ages in one room, being taught by one teacher, having to sort of work around it. So I mean, I can't even imagine what kind of experience that would be as a kid to grow up with this being your normal is fascinating.
Magical and special, but it probably feels just like normal. That's their normal.
Yeah,
thing.
it's normal.
They're used to.
I mean, my friend on the floor crew still jokes about the time that he was sitting there talking to the little 4-year-old daughter of the human cannonball, and like she was hanging out with her friend, and at one point she's like, "Oh yeah, no, Tommy had to leave because his mommy has to go shoot my mommy out of a cannon," and like this is just completely normal to her. That this is what.
Just another day at work.
Yep.
Well, Barbara or Julie, do you have any other burning questions for Laura?
No, I just appreciate being able to attend this group.
No, Laura, it's been really interesting. Thank you.
Yes.
Yes, thank you so much. It was so exciting. I just stumbled on her on Twitter and said, "Oh, this person knows about circuses, and we're reading the circus book," and she was so kind to agree to my offer.
Well, thank you for contacting her, Bethany.
Yes.
And for working around my schedule. It's fun. I mean, I don't get to talk about this stuff all that often, and it's fun to remember and babble about it to an interested audience.
Well, we really appreciate just learning about your experiences and getting to kind of compare what it's really like to what we read about. So thank you so much for sharing with us.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I could say if you want to read more circus stuff, I really recommend from sort of the era of Water for Elephants. I mean, I read a lot of nonfiction circus stuff. That's kind of fun. Is called Circus Doctor, which is, I believe the author is Henderson. He was the veterinarian for the Ringling Brothers back in the sort of 60s time frame. And so he has a lot of really cool stories of like working as the veterinarian, because they had him as full-time traveling veterinarian during the days of Gunther Gable Williams and all of the big stuff. And I think that's a really cool read. And there's a whole bunch of other ones that are a little more current or focus on different things. But like if you enjoyed Water for Elephants, you might enjoy getting some more of that peek into how things were going from someone who was actually there in a similar time frame, a little later, a few decades later, but still like at the midpoint. There's cool stuff.
Well, excellent. Well, we'll let you go and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much, and